Hello and welcome to the McAllister Gaming Society Radio Hour on WMCN, McAllister College Radio. I am Matthew Davids with
James Goings.
And I've been promoted to co-host for this evening.
Well, forever. But yes, we decided to just be easier than saying guest host every single time. So yes, we are now on equal ground, Matt.
Equal always, forever?
Well, except for when you argue for the episodic gaming formula, there might be some arguing. But other than that, we're friends, right?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So let's get started with the news segment of our show. Up first, we have some unfortunate news. The game Bear Simulator, which managed to bring in over $100,000 on Kickstarter and has been in development for some years, has been canceled by the developer. They released a statement essentially saying, the game didn't have great reception, has a stigma against its name, and there's plenty of other problems, so making any updates or going further is basically a lost cause now. Must be doing this PC game dev thing wrong, because it's way too hard to stay happy and productive.
Yeah, Bear Simulator sort of came out of the idea. In his Kickstarter, he stated that he really noticed that there was this problem with gaming, and that problem was that all these games are kind of fun, kind of popular, but they're all very biased. None of them allow you to play as a bear. And so that's what he created. It was backed at, I think, about $100,570, I want to say, and which barely made it over its 100,000 mark, but that is a lot of money to make for this kind of a game.
It barely made it over that mark?
I was hoping you'd catch that. I would say that I personally would not enjoy playing as a bear out in the wilderness, but this is popular.
You probably didn't like Goat Simulator then.
I can't say I was the biggest fan. I thought it was a buggy mess, personally.
Well, that was the point. You got an achievement if the game crashed.
Really? Is that true?
Yes. Sorry, we're getting on a tangent about a completely different game called Goat Simulator that, while not necessarily being the most polished game, was successful financially and was able to garner quite a big following. And I'm assuming that this developer, while yes, there was probably some inspiration on their own terms coming up with this game, was also kind of riding on the success of Goat Simulator. I mean, this game, which was kickstarted and developed by one person, it's on Steam. It's still on Steam, I believe, for $15.
Well, it's on Steam for $15, but remember, this is one person making a game over several years, and this game is not actually that bad. On Steam, if I recall, it has a 78% rating, which is not a bad game. I believe on Steam it calls it mostly positive reviews. But if you look at the reviews that are there's this sort of feature on Steam where you can rate a review as helpful. And so users who don't own the game can review a game or can review one of those reviews as being helpful, so that other people know that this review really seemed very useful to me. And all of the reviews that are marked as helpful are negative reviews.
Yes. I guess that's also sort of a bit of a commentary on Steam reviews, which isn't that's a different rabbit hole that we can get into.
Right, but my point is that the game is not that bad. Really, it's hard to know exactly what the developer is talking about with all the drama that's going on.
Well, I think a big part of it is this. I believe this statement was issued today, and 2 days ago, 1 or 2 days ago, before this statement, the popular YouTube gamer PewDiePie had a video where he really just panned this game, and I watched the video because I subscribed to PewDiePie, and I mean it made me think, because a lot of YouTube videos of people playing games that I enjoy as videos to watch are people playing bad games and sort of commentating, and the viewer gets to share in sort of the pain of the gamer who's playing this. And I didn't think anything of it. That was the first time I'd personally heard of this game, Bear Simulator, was when PewDiePie played it. But now I'm hearing that there's been just a huge rush of negativity that this developer, Farjay, has not been able to handle very well. And that's no critique on Farjay's ability to handle criticism. I understand the fact that PewDiePie has over 40 million subscribers, and they're all watching him pan this game. And that can be very overwhelming.
One thing that's interesting, though, is that if I remember from an article that I read, it was not only that PewDiePie panned the game. At the end of the video, he did something which I personally am very much against. If I recall, and you watched the video, so you can back me up on this or tell me if I'm wrong, that PewDiePie actually attempted to get a refund from Steam, and during the process of getting the refund on video, he flipped off the developer.
Yep.
So PewDiePie is a very wealthy person at this time, and trying to get a refund for a $15 game from an indie developer that's one person, that personally I don't understand. And then from that, all of his fans go, oh, this developer clearly didn't put much time and effort in. But this developer has put many years of his life in, has put in a fair number of updates to the game, not as many as his fans would like, and obviously not all of them have been on time. But again, that's sort of just looking at the whole indie developer scene in general, and that's sort of a sad sight. But it's very hard for me to understand why PewDiePie would do something like that.
I mean, the concept that this is funny, that I'm taking this to an extreme and this extreme is funny, would be my assumption. What this whole scenario reminds me quite a bit of is, do you remember the game Flappy Bird, Matthew?
Yes, I did.
I remember, it's similar in that there was a rush of people having critiques on this game. It was almost to the point that it got too popular as opposed to too negative, but that was a similar case where the developer behind the iOS game Flappy Bird was in a similar scenario in that he just couldn't take the pressure of just so much emotion being thrown at this game from such a huge fan base that he pulled it from the iOS store. And I kind of feel bad for him, and I kind of feel bad for Farjay, the developer of Bear Simulator.
Well, just out of curiosity, I thought that Flappy Bird got pulled for copyright infringement.
I believe. That's a thing that's a story that people tell.
Okay.
But in looking at the Twitter feed of the developer, they had posted a couple of times, I never thought Flappy Bird was going to get this big. It's just too much pressure. It's just too big. I'm going to be pulling it. And copyright infringement might have been a part of that we just didn't get to see. The fact that this game became so big, and yes, there are definitely Mario pipes, and there might have been people reaching out to him, and that was part of the pressure. But at least looking at the Twitter feed of the developer for Flappy Bird, it was more so just the fact that he never anticipated the game to get that popular and had a hard time dealing with that, and then took it off the App Store.
Absolutely. Fortunately, one of the sort of strange thing that came out of it was that people would sell their iPod Touches with Flappy Bird on it after it got pulled from the App Store, and they would sell for these ludicrous sums of money because they were like, "Hey, it's an iPhone or an iPod Touch that has Flappy Bird," and somehow that made it more valuable.
Did you ever play Flappy Bird? I'm just curious.
I did play it. I had a friend who had it on his iPhone, and I was able to play it for a couple of rounds.
It was a free game that I played and was not very good at, to be honest. I never got the craze, but if that's your thing, then I understand why people. It was really popular, so I would understand why there would be a market for that. It's still just very interesting.
Yeah, it's just one of the cases of a market coming out of nowhere, really.
Mm-hmm. Moving on to our next news segment, there are currently at Nintendo quite a few games that released on the Super Nintendo that are making their way to the Nintendo 3DS eShop. On March 3rd, Pilot Wings, Super Mario World, and F-Zero, 3 classics, made their way to the handheld. And in the coming weeks, March 24th, they are releasing Super Mario Kart and Earthbound and Donkey Kong Country. April 14th, Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, Super Metroid, and Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy Kong's Quest. And these are all, I think, good things, but there's been a lot of outcry that these aren't coming to the Wii U, this couch console, the Wii U, this couch console that, people can play on their big screen TVs. Why? Because these games, the Super Nintendo wasn't a handheld, it was a home console, and all these games are coming to what you could consider to be a current gen console, but they're coming in the form of handheld games. So there's been quite a lot of outcry that, hey, can we please have these on the Wii U?
Yeah, I'm not really sure why they wouldn't come to the Wii U, but I can understand Nintendo's sort of thought process behind it, I would say. Like, I remember playing Zelda Link to the Past and on a Game Boy SP at the time, and I can definitely see that it really feels more like a handheld game than it would like a console game. It would sort of be too large on a bigger screen, I think.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. And, I mean, also, a lot of Legend of Zelda games came out on the DS to quite a bit of critical acclaim, Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks. So, I mean, it's not unreasonable that all these, specifically Zelda games, would make their way to the handheld. I just think it's really interesting that Nintendo wouldn't release them on the Wii U, because it's not as though we talked about last week that about a couple of games that have been completely not just remastered but have been remade in new engines, such as they're remaking Final Fantasy VII, they're remaking Resident Evil 2 and 4. Nintendo is not doing that with these. They're simply porting them. They're not building them all over again from the ground up on a new engine. They're just porting them. And if they're just porting them and they're not even distributing them in physical copies, they're just putting them up online. I mean, not online, but on their store, on the eShop for the 3DS, it would seem to be a relatively easy task just to put these up so that Wii U players can download them as well.
I mean, that's probably true. I'm not sure how the architecture works in that, and there might be some underlying issues that make it somehow more difficult to port something from the SNES to Wii U. I wouldn't know, but honestly, it's a 2D game. I could see them porting it to Wii U if they had, I don't know, built a new engine for it and made it into a 3D type of a game, but it seems very strange to try to port that over to Wii U. I recognize that, yes, honestly, it would be better if it could be everywhere, but I can kind of understand their thought process, I think.
Yep, that's fair. And then our last piece of news, cycling back to a topic, we know what we're going to say, and it is quite ludicrous. Cycling back to a topic that we talked about earlier on the show, and that's DLC for the Star Wars Battlefront game. The new Star Wars Battlefront DLC has been announced. Just exactly what is in it. It is the Outer Rim, the Outer Rim expansion. And most notably, it is including 2 new heroes that you can play in Star Wars Battlefront. And they are Greedo and Nien Numb.
That silence is a question of sorry who is that?
You would be excused for not knowing either of those. I mean, Greedo, kind of, because there's the popular meme, Greedo shot first. Greedo is the green alien.
I believe that the meme is actually Han shot first.
Oh man,
I recall.
I just lost all my credibility, and on the radio too. This is a recording. Yes, it is Han shot first. Thank you, Matt, for pointing that out. Do you want to talk about the characters? I've kind of lost my credibility here.
Look, I can understand Greedo. I can get it. Look, Greedo is at least a vaguely interesting character. He shows up, and then, this is spoilers for anyone who has not seen Star Wars A New Hope. This is going to be a really quick spoiler here, but Greedo dies really, really quickly and sort of for no real purpose other than to further Han's character. So I can kind of understand Greedo, but I can't even pronounce the Nien Numb.
Nien, it's spelled Nien, Nien, and then Numb, Nien Numb. And
so from the picture, I have a picture with me here, and I can sort of tell who this is. If anyone remembers from, I believe it was Return of the Jedi, during the scene where the Millennium Falcon takes out the second iteration of the Death Star, Nien Numb, I believe, is the co-pilot of the Millennium Falcon at that point.
Yep, Lando is piloting because Han is down on the surface of Endor. Lando is piloting, and Nien Numb is the Celestin, if any of you know what species of Star Wars that is.
Unlikely.
The Celestin co-pilot of Lando's.
So here's a question. Why didn't they just make Lando a character?
Do you honestly expect an answer
Okay,
from me? I don't.
Okay, so what about some other famous characters? How about Chewbacca?
Chewbacca? Obi-Wan Kenobi?
That's a good one. What about Yoda?
Yoda would, it doesn't necessarily make as much sense from a canon standpoint, but at least give us characters that we know and can pronounce their names. It just seems
Okay. We're not going to go for the name pronunciation thing. But again, it's a very, very strange choice in my opinion. And it's just another one of those strange choices from a developer that, at least at this point, doesn't seem to care too much about people who bought Battlefront's money. The game has not been supported especially well, and now they're releasing these two characters who you can only really get after you've paid over $100 for the game.
Yeah, and it really makes me interested, is whose prerogative has this been on? Has this been more of EA, who is the publisher and probably in charge of marketing for the game? Or is it DICE, the actual developers behind the product? I guess we don't know. Matt and I don't know because we're not a part of it. We can only speculate. So that is our news segment of our show.
Actually, I have another piece of news.
Oh, you do, Matt? I'm interested to hear it.
Just to really briefly pop in here. So James, have you ever heard of Pokemon?
Yes. Yes, I have.
I was hoping for that answer. Have you heard of Pokemon Go?
Yes, I have. I know that it is coming out for iOS.
And Android.
And Android. That is about the extent of what I have personally heard. I have not followed it quite as much.
All right, Pokemon Go is one of the games that I am most excited for coming out this year, hopefully. Fingers crossed. Pokemon Go is developed, if I recall, by Niantic, which is a developer which created Ingress, which was a strangely popular artificial reality game. So what that means is that people would actually have to go to physical locations. And in certain locations, there would be certain things that you could do, and you could meet up with other people who were also going to that location for some type of an event. And Ingress became so popular that there was a web series that came out, which talked about all the different goings on in this game. It was incredible. These people created this universe, and tons of players loved to interact with it and loved to actually go to different places. And in the same strain, Pokemon Go is going to allow us, every person, to become a Pokemon trainer. Oh my goodness, I've waited to say that for so long. You go out into the world, and you can catch Pokemon, and you can look at somebody across the road and be like, aha, I would like to challenge you to a Pokemon battle. And you can battle them. And that's just a thing you can do. You can wander through tall grass and you can legitimately catch Pokemon. You have to go to mountains in order to catch mountainous Pokemon. It's amazing to me. Like you have to actually go out onto the water in order to catch a water Pokemon, like fishing. Or at least these are my assumptions based on what they've told us. I could be wrong. I hope I'm not. But anyway, so to the actual news here, Pokemon Go has finally started to do a beta test. Unfortunately, it's only allowed in Japan, but soon, hopefully, they will be allowing people to beta test in the United States or really just other countries. And I'm very, very excited for that.
Is the option available to us to be the very best?
I believe that is explicitly stated in the rules.
Followed quickly by just like no one ever was.
For those of you who do not know, James is currently quoting the theme song for Pokemon.
It's a quality theme song. Thanks for bringing that up. That was really interesting. No, I mean, I'm learning things too here. There's always more out there. Is what we're learning in terms of video games.
The truth is out there.
Yes. Half-Life 3 is coming.
That's an X-Files reference, actually.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that. I haven't seen X-Files.
Good show.
I will have to watch it. More learning. Anyway, Matt and I are going to take a break here. When we come back, we are going to cover our feature, and that is the growing presence of multiplayer in current video games. But while we leave you, we are going to be playing the main theme from Assassin's Creed Revelations, a game that had a multiplayer mode, as it so happens, that was quite controversial, and we'll talk about that when we come back. So, for now, this has been Gaming Society Radio Hour on WMCM College Radio. And we're back with Gaming Society Radio Hour. I am co-host James Goings.
And I'm co-host Matthew Davids.
And we're going to move on to our feature, and that's the growing presence of multiplayer in games. To kick things off, I would like to share a really, really interesting quote from 2011. This was at the European Game Developers Conference. And Mark Cerny, who's an industry veteran, had a really controversial quote. He said something, and this is an excerpt of the quote. "The traditional single-player game experience will be gone in 3 years. Right now, you sit in your living room and you're playing a game by yourself. We call it the SP mission, or the single-player campaign. In a world with Facebook, I just don't think that's going to last."
Just to note, this statement was released in 2011, and so he predicted that single-player gaming would die at the end of 2014.
Yes, and that, while still ludicrous, I understand why he said that, because at the time there were a number of games being released that belonged to franchises that had, up until that point, been exclusively single-player games. I'm talking about BioShock 2 having a multiplayer mode. I'm talking about Assassin's Creed Brotherhood having a multiplayer mode. And let's see, there were a couple others, like the Arkham series, Arkham Origins, released with a tacked-on multiplayer mode. So at the time, what was happening was Call of Duty, that franchise, was breaking records left and right in terms of just the money it was making. And a lot of people were playing that because of the draw that the multiplayer part of that game had. A lot of people also predicted and are still predicting that eventually there probably isn't going to be a single-player campaign in Call of Duty. And while I would hate to see that day come, because I actually play Call of Duty for the single-player campaign, I know that is funny, but sometimes you just need a power trip. Regardless, I'd be sad to see that, but I completely understand why people would think that that would be a thing, because it's a trend. It's a trend because more and more people are getting into multiplayer, and more games are including multiplayer modes where originally there were none.
So the Call of Duty franchise didn't really become incredibly popular. It was always relatively popular, but it really sort of came out with Modern Warfare, Call of Duty 4, in 2007, and that's what makes it so interesting to me, is that he said it in 2011. So that was 4 years after sort of Call of Duty really started to get big. And I think 2011 would have been Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3.
Yes, and that, incidentally, talking about multiplayer and things we talked about last week, Modern Warfare 3 was the launch title for the subscription service of Call of Duty Elite.
Unfortunately, it was actually not a very good game, and critics mostly panned it.
Yes, single player and multiplayer, because there was very little renovation done from the previous formula that Modern Warfare 2 had set out. But yeah, yes, I mean, that just, it goes to show that just because it's a trend doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to completely eclipse single-player gaming, because there's still been hurdles in terms of quality and what have you.
Especially since in the last couple of years, we've had this trend of episodic gaming, which is entirely story-driven and entirely single-player. And so for me, the idea that single-player gaming would have died in 2014 is preposterous, because that was round about the time when Telltale really started to get going.
Yep, that's fair. And a lot of what were some of the most critically well-received games of last year, you have Until Dawn, which was single-player. You have The Witcher 3, which was single-player. I mean, there is still a very healthy market for single-player games. But I mean, let's talk a little bit about what has changed from 2011 and what has stayed the same. So just how right or wrong was Mark Cerny? One thing that has evolved, for good or ill, we can argue that, is ever since then there have been more and more multiplayer-only, full-priced games being released, such as Evolve and Titanfall are two big ones.
And Battlefront.
And for all intents and purposes, Star Wars Battlefront. Yes.
So it's sort of a strange process where these games get released for this large sum of money, and people sort of believe that it's just not enough content for their money. Which is such a strange thing, because when people are making these multiplayer-only titles, they're making them to be replayable. Call of Duty franchises, the amount of time that people put into the multiplayer is an absolutely incredible amount. I know on Black Ops 1 have multiple days worth of playtime. In Black Ops 2 have multiple days worth of playtime. These are multiplayer franchises that I've played for very, very lengthy periods of time, and I can't really say that I've done that nearly as much with anything else. And so for me, it sort of seems like it's an automatic win-win. But somehow it isn't. These franchises just very quickly die out.
So I guess, what is it exactly that is making it so that, I mean, people are willing to pay full price for Call of Duty games, and a lot of them are just playing the multiplayer part of it, but Call of Duty's still been successful, whereas the fan base and player base for Evolve and Titanfall died out relatively quickly. I mean, it's almost sad how much of almost a joke they have become, because I believe in one of the past episodes I asked, Matt, do you still play Evolve? Does anyone still play Evolve?
As far as I know, the answer is still no.
So what is it? And I have to think that it has something to do with the single-player campaign.
I think we really have to look at multiplayer-only titles that have done well, personally. Like, what is the current most popular multiplayer game that you know of?
Popularity in terms of just the number of people that are playing it.
Well, we've been talking about first-person shooters and things like that a lot. So, like, for that, let's go with Counter-Strike, shall we? Mm-hmm. And Counter-Strike is wildly popular. It's a multiplayer-only game, and somehow it's extremely popular in both competitive scene and just casual scene. And personally, what I would attribute that to is just the price point. Counter-Strike is about, $20? And Battlefront is $60, and one of them you can get more enjoyment out of for less money.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. So then, okay, so maybe it's not maybe it's not the lack of single player, maybe it's the price point. So let's look at what are the arguments, quote around arguments, for having a fully priced multiplayer game. Playing devil's advocate here, of course. Okay, so I made Titanfall. I'm role-playing here. I made Titanfall, and I'm charging $60 for it, which is the regular price for a new game, because it might be multiplayer only, but a lot of multiplayer games are made so that, I mean, it's the grind of leveling up, of getting new items. So a lot of multiplayer games get a lot of hours played on them. Okay, so I'm charging $60 because you'll play it a lot. I'm also charging $60 because this multiplayer mode, because that's all it is just multiplayer, we were able to focus on it and put a lot more time and effort into having the multiplayer experience, since that is the sum of the experience that you're getting with my game. We were able to refine it, and it is probably going to be better than the multiplayer in games that are not multiplayer only.
What's really funny is that all of those things are actually true about Titanfall, and Titanfall did not die because it was not a good game. Titanfall actually was an excellent game, and everybody loved it. The issue was that once they started releasing map packs and things like that, they didn't have enough people. So the player base got split by these different map packs, and because of that, there just weren't enough people searching for games at the same time that had the same map packs. And so because of that, the game felt like it had died out, even if there were 10,000 people playing it. When you can only search for another 1,000 people, and maybe they're in different game modes, it really feels like there's nobody else there, and so you stop playing. And when those 1,000 people stop playing, there's 1,000 less people. Now there's only 9,000, and even less people are playing the game. And it just slowly goes like that until it dies down. Titanfall, they actually did focus on multiplayer, and they actually did make it a reasonably good game, but unfortunately, another multiplayer-only title falls because $60, it's too much for most people to spend.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like you're saying that the DLC, season pass, and price of admission were too high.
It's possible that I made this argument before.
So, what is it? There are some multiplayer-only games that are charging $60 that are able to succeed. Let's talk about Destiny. What is it about Destiny that is? I feel as though I feel as though you have the answer, Matt. So I'll ask the question, and then I'll turn it over to you. What is it about Destiny that is keeping fans engaged, whereas Titanfall failed? Because on the surface, they're both first-person shooters. They're both multiplayer, and they are both. And they were both charged, $60 full price. So what is it that about Destiny that has been hugely successful? What is it doing better that Titanfall has struggled with?
Destiny is a very, very special game. Calling it a multiplayer-only game, while absolutely true, is such a strange statement because, yes, it is a multiplayer-only game. You can only play it with other people, but it's also kind of a single-player game, and really the best way to describe Destiny is it's a massive multiplayer online game. It is an MMORPG. That's what it is. You're always there on like the tower and other locations with a whole bunch of other people. You have this opportunity to do these large scale raids with other teammates. You can battle in PvP. It really is just this sort of, it's one of the first, I think, console MMOs, as far as I know.
So it sounds like what we're thinking is that the fact that Titanfall is a competitive shooter, whereas Destiny has that component to it, but there's so much more you can do because it's a MMO.
Yeah, Destiny, honestly, you can play Destiny solo. You can play Destiny single player if you would like to. Although there are several other issues with that sort of go along the price versus enjoyment, where Destiny not only was a full price release, but it's released several expansions since then, with the latest one being The Taken King. Another thing about Destiny that's really interesting when you said that just people stick with the game is that people haven't. It's a really, really strange game. They'll go through these resurgence periods. Destiny was really popular on release and about until people ran out of content, because as with all MMOs, at some point you reach max level, you've gotten basically the loot that you want, and you've run the highest raid as many times as you can really stomach, and because it's the same raid every single time, you're just really hoping to get better loot. And so at some point you burn out and you stop playing the game, but theoretically, that would be the moment when they release a new expansion, which adds in a new raid and adds in new content and new single-player missions, and then you come back to it. So Destiny has had this very strange cycle where people will be playing the game very much, just hardcore all the time, and then they'll just stop. They'll burn out of it, they'll stop playing it for 3, 4 months, 6 months, they'll stop playing it for a year, and then they'll come back to it with a new expansion, or maybe a couple expansions down the road when they have a few friends to play it with.
Mm-hmm. Let's cycle back then, because I feel like we've covered this pretty well. Let's cycle back to an earlier topic point, and that is multiplayer modes that have been tacked on to what have been historically single-player games. So let's talk about multiplayer in games like BioShock, Arkham, and Assassin's Creed. Have you played any of those? Have you played the multiplayer in any of those games, or any games that have a tacked on multiplayer mode?
I did. I played some of the Assassin's Creed multiplayer as well as some multiplayer in Mass Effect 3. Okay.
So let's talk about those, because I played both of those as well. So we have personal experience that we can draw from for those. To its credit, to Assassin's Creed credit, let's talk about that first. It had an interesting take on a multiplayer what a multiplayer experience is. It's very much stealth-based. It's almost Hidden Traitor-esque. It's interesting how, yes, it's tacked on in the sense, the multiplayer mode is tacked on in the sense that this game has historically been single-player only. But that said, they really did a good job of making the multiplayer portion of it very unique. Now, Syndicate and Unity cut the competitive multiplayer part out of the game because, I mean, yes, it was really fun and interesting at first, but interest sort of died down after a while. Not as quickly as Titanfall, but it did die down after a while, and they focused on more of what I would argue people buy Assassin's Creed game for, and it is for the single player. But that said, their brief dalliance into multiplayer, I don't fault Ubisoft, but that is also a very specific example.
I would say that Assassin's Creed, you buy it for the single player, and then the multiplayer was just there as sort of an added bonus. I don't think that they put probably as much time as they really would have needed to make it sort of fully robust and a fully enjoyable experience, but I would say it was solid.
I think it did its job, and it did its job, and it was good at it.
Yeah, it engaged me. I was able to run around, pretend that I was an assassin, and attack some other random people online. It was exactly what I was looking for personally. I kind of miss it from the sort of the newer iterations in the franchise. I think it was actually quite enjoyable personally.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about then Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, which the way it worked is, well, first of all, the way that the game is played, Mass Effect 3 is it's a cover-based third-person shooter.
Where you kind of have superpowers.
Yes. Well, Yes. That's how the game is played. The game itself is in the style of a role-playing game that is set over a trilogy, and only the third game here added the cooperative wave defense, sort of similar to Call of Duty Zombies, but
It was not that similar to Call of Duty Zombies, except that it was wave-based. The difference is that
wave-based, I guess.
the
Yes.
difference is that Call of Duty Zombies doesn't end until you die, whereas this was very much 10 waves and you're done.
Yep,
So it
that's
was
fair.
about a 20-minute-ish commitment, and that was it.
Okay, so I guess here's my question, and again, we're looking at specific examples, so we can be specific. What do you play Mass Effect, the Mass Effect series for, Matt?
Before I played Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, I would say I played it for the story. But after playing the multiplayer, I can honestly say that I'm looking forward to that more than the story in Mass Effect Andromeda.
That really interests me, and I mean that's a fair statement to make. When I was not overly impressed with the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, simply because it felt very by the numbers for me, and it wasn't where the Assassin's Creed multiplayer, that was special and that was unique. I felt the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer was just more of my least favorite facet of the game, of the Mass Effect series, and that was the shooting. And while the shooting and the gameplay in that regard added tension to the story in the single player, I play Mass Effect for the story and the engaging characters and the choices that I can make along my journey as Commander Shepard. And what the multiplayer was it was just sort of my least favorite. It was my least favorite facet of the game. So it didn't draw me in because it felt very by the numbers in that regard, in that it just sort of took the story out of Mass Effect. And when you take the story out of Mass Effect, what's left is a very mediocre third-person shooter that's cover-based.
So, as someone who's played hundreds of hours in the multiplayer, I can tell you that while at first it might have felt like it was by the numbers, they put a lot more effort into it than at first people think, because not only did they continually keep replenishing sort of the fan base by adding new free DLC with characters as well as new maps, and the characters completely changed up how the game was played. It was amazing. They added new powers and new abilities, but what was the best about Mass Effect multiplayer is that it is the most cooperative game I think I've ever played. You could legitimately help your teammates. There were synergies between different groups. Like you could go as a biotic team, and then you would all use different biotic powers that would work really well together. Or you could say, "Hey, let's do a tech team," and then you'd have one person who's spamming one power, another person who's repeatedly using another power, and it just felt really, really visceral, really good, and the tension was there, and it was very exciting, and it was amazing.
Mm-hmm. That's an absolutely fair opinion. I came into the Mass Effect 3 multiplayer somewhat jaded, because not only had Mass Effect until this point not had multiplayer, but when they did incorporate multiplayer into the Mass Effect 3 game, they made it so that in the single player game, and they since patched this, but for the first couple months, I believe, you had the way that the game and the systems within the game are set up, in just the basic premise of the story of the single player of Mass Effect 3 is you're trying to ready the galaxy for war.
You're getting a bunch of numbers higher. I'm just going to do this really quickly. You get a bunch of numbers higher. They call them assets, and then based on how much time you spent in multiplayer, you get more assets, more or less, or rather, you get a percentage of your assets back.
Right.
So if you don't play any multiplayer, you have only 50% of your assets. And in order to get the best endings, you needed to have a high number of assets, which was impossible to do when you had a low percentage.
Right. So before they patched this, essentially, if you wanted to get the best ending, and by best, I mean with the most assets, you had to play the multiplayer campaign, or the multiplayer mode. And at that time, I was living at home and not at college here, and I do not have internet access at my house on which to play multiplayer. So for me, that was a huge, huge bummer because while a lot of games were coming out with a huge focus on the multiplayer aspect, there were still a lot of games with single player that I could enjoy by myself because I didn't necessarily have another way of enjoying them. And the fact that that experience was detracted from by the fact that I now had to play multiplayer, but I couldn't play multiplayer. And again, this is a very specific example, but I feel as though that was really poorly implemented.
I would say that it wasn't the best idea, but I would say that most likely they did that because they were actually really proud of what they had made, and they said, hey, I really want people to try it, but no one will if we don't do this. I also will say that I am rather biased in my love for the multiplayer because I got into Mass Effect because of the multiplayer. I don't know if you played it, but they released a Mass Effect 3 demo about a month before the game was released. And so at the time, I didn't know what Mass Effect was. I'd barely heard of it, but a couple of friends of mine said, hey, you should get this demo. It's free and we can play together. And so I was like, oh, all right, sure. And so we played the demo, and I thought it was a blast playing with my friends, and it was fantastic. And so I already knew that the multiplayer was something that I was going to want to do. And so when I came into the Mass Effect 3, I immediately was like, oh, well, the multiplayer is still there. I still want to try it. It's just a little bit better. And so it was my first thought was just playing with my friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really cool. So that just about ends this for us. We're going to end with our pitches for games that we think that you should be playing. Matt, why don't you do yours first?
All right. One of my favorite games of all time, I say that a lot, I'm realizing I love a lot of games, was Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac is a roguelike game, which means that essentially you get power-ups. It's a 2D game, and you get power-ups, and they interact in fun and interesting ways, and you go through this procedurally generated dungeon that's random every time, and you get more powerful, and you just sort of beat the game. It's a blast, or at least in my opinion. It's just sort of fun to see how different items work together in combination.
Mm-hmm. And I am going to pitch an older game. I'm going to pitch Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and I feel as though I might get some groans, but I played it recently, and it holds up really well. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood was the game that came out after Assassin's Creed 2, so it's the third Assassin's Creed game. And it really did a lot for the series, and it's an interesting, if you're a fan of Assassin's Creed, it's a really interesting page out of its history, because it was the first game that incorporated the concept of recruiting and using the Brotherhood, so you were not functioning alone as an assassin. Again, we talked about it was the first one to incorporate the multiplayer mode, and I still feel as though, just in terms of maps and characters and customization, that of the 3 games that had competitive multiplayer in the Assassin's Creed, the 4 games that had the Assassin's Creed multiplayer, I still feel as though that's the strongest. And it just really has an engaging story and really good gameplay. It's probably my favorite Assassin's Creed game. So that is my pitch.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, I agree. It's also a fantastic game.
So with that ends our show. Thank you very much for listening. This has been WMCM College Radio, the Gaming Society Radio Hour with co-host James Goings
and Matthew Davids.
Thank you very much for listening.